Ben Calabasa is going to start the class by talking about presenting yourself in a professional manner as an artist or as a company, as a business, using whether it be Keynote or PowerPoint, and the importance of the awareness of multimedia, the importance of, in essence, branding yourself so that you become a recognizable product in yourself. For example, if I say Picasso, does anyone ask Picasso who? That's because everyone knows it's a Picasso. When you say it's a Picasso, no one says, is that Fred Picasso? All right. The same way that if we were to say it's a Calabasa, hopefully no one would say Calabasa who. All right. When your name becomes that recognizable, when it becomes identifiable with an art form, you have become your own brand. And that's what a lot of artists strive to do. So it's important in presenting yourself in the 21st century, being aware of the power of media, even in a simple program such as Keynote or PowerPoint. So Ben's going to introduce you to PowerPoint tonight and utilization of it, as well as Keynote. And then the second part of the class, you're going to have your introduction to PowerPoint in a much more basic manner. But what he's showing you are the possibilities with a little bit of training in design, web skills, and the like.
All right. I'm going to switch lights. So, good evening. Hope everyone had a good dinner. Or not? Yeah? Yes. Okay, so I have two students in my digital arts class, so you kind of will get this from previous presentations. But those of you who don't know me, outside of teaching here at IAI and working here, I'm also the Vice President of Creative and Marketing for iRoots Media, which is a company that I started in California in 2000 and moved it here to New Mexico in 2006. So a little bit about using PowerPoint, as Steve mentioned, that when we start to work with clients, right, and clients for me are more than just artists. They could be nonprofits and businesses. Oftentimes they come to us to create an image, a logo for their company, whether it's something they've already created or something that they're trying to reinvent. And at these presentations, we always provide information into how we want them to start to think, right? As an artist, sometimes you can't just go to Canvas and go to work, right? There's research involved. And when you're working with a team especially, you want to have everyone sort of on the same page. And so for me, the PowerPoint that I'm going to share two of them, which is kind of an evolution of our company and how we've sort of created our own look in terms of our presentations and grown in terms of how we do things. There's going to be some information in these PowerPoints that can be useful to you as an artist. It doesn't mean that because what you're viewing is for companies, that it's not relatable to artists or students, because it all is basically the general sort of sense of what this presentation is that can be applied to anything. So to get started, I always have my logo, or our logo, incorporated in the very beginning, so when people show up, that's the first thing they see. It's a part of the experience. Then the second title card is basically what is going to take place, right? So for this presentation, this is a recycled presentation for this organization, Laguna Community Foundation, based in Laguna Pueblo. We are creating their brand. And rather than explain and take my time using fancy words to try to get you to understand what I mean by branding, we thought it was better to create a video, since we're all in this age of looking at videos and watching and we're visual learners. This made more sense. So you're going to see this quick video about what branding is. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has anybody known that information prior to seeing this? Odin? In what way?
What is it? When I was studying in Santa Monica, one of the things that we had a lecture on during the I believe it was perspective class, degree perspective, was that there's an importance to the way you write words and such that, so when you look at it from an angle, you know what it says. We had an entire tutorial basically like take the Coca-Cola font and then write it on paper in 3 different, 4 or 5 different directions and see if you can still make it say Coca-Cola. And then we had experiments in expression digital art where we had to make our own brand and make sure it was something that's eye-catching but not overstimulating when we looked at it. Something it had to be worded a specific way so that mnemically you just remembered off the tip of your head,
Right.
your tongue. And we had experiments in psychology classes where not experiments, but like courses where we had to create a symbol that you could associate with something.
Great.
Looked at brands and like mascot characters.
So going off of what Odin just said, if I say Coca-Cola, Nike, Apple, McDonald's, you're able to visualize without me showing you what those brands represent, correct?
Yes.
Yeah? So we may have seen the swoosh, right? When I said Nike, Coca-Cola, right? Red, the Apple logo, and the McDonald's logo. So how this relates to you as an artist is very important in how people will identify you, right? Are many of you aware of Virgil Ortiz, for example?
Yes.
Right? So he's one of the first artists that I've seen that actually has created a brand or a logo that's associated with his name, right? Many artists do this. Of course, in my class in digital arts, you guys have understood that this has been going on for centuries, right? We can see this done in like the Greeks, right, and the Romans doing this. Artists stamping furniture or work with the Greek alphabets to brand who they were, right? So this isn't anything new. So moving further into how brands are created, we can also associate color to a brand, right? As I mentioned, Coca-Cola, all of that section was in red, right? So as we look at this, we have to be conscious of what color can do when we're talking about brands, when we're talking about presentations, and how we image ourselves, right? So a study that was done in the 70s to figure out how to sell more food to people, they discovered that this section, the warm section of the color wheel, from oranges, reds to yellows, evoked hunger in people, right? So if you can close your eyes, you don't have to, but if you can close your eyes and imagine driving down Cerrillos, right? And you see the fast food signs on the road. Do you see these colors of oranges, yellows, and reds, right? Okay. So in color theory, you'll know that they'll use complementary colors to kind of put together their brand. So when you look at like Taco Bell, who uses yellow, uses purple as well, right, within their brand. Right. So the other section that was studied was this other half, which evokes calmness, right? So if you've ever been to the hospital, dentists paid attention to the wall color. Most of the times they're going to be pastel blues, right, or greens to kind of get you in that mode to kind of calm down. So if we had that same environment painted in all red, how do you think you'd feel?
Scared. Angry.
Right? Kind of scared, not sure of what's going to happen. So color can play a very key role in how people perceive not only your business but yourself as an artist, right? Sometimes we can see this as an artist's palette, right? You can hear, sometimes artists will say, this is more of my color palette that I've used through all of my work. So does it have some kind of effect on you, right, as you're creating artwork? So that's just something to consider when you're creating your presentations, right? How do you use the spectrum of color to evoke something, and as you're sharing your message, what are you trying to do, right? Another very interesting thing that I'll kind of share with you that isn't really a part of the class, but it's just useful information to understand if you're planning to do more work as an artist independently is to understand, obviously, your customers, right? People who you're presenting to. So it's very faint on the screen, but it actually says boomers in the back. Usually when I say that, there's always someone who says Sooners. No, OU fans.
Oh, I see it.
Okay. So what happens here, so this is a certain specific demographic, right? This is usually the people who are from the generation from World War II, right? Soldiers who came back, had children, they're of this generation. So when we talk about communication, and if you look underneath, it says urgency. This is how this generation would have communicated if it was an urgent matter for one, starting with writing a letter, right? So say they had a product and didn't work, they would write a letter, send it off, right? They didn't get a response. They would then call them on the phone, right? Again, so this method of communication is just based on urgency. So say you were trying to reach your daughter, okay? In this format, they write a letter maybe. If they were off in college, they call them, didn't answer. Then they maybe go over, right, and check on them. So if you look at the span of urgency, it's very short from going from one place to face, okay? We're trying to get to face, basically. So if we look at Generation X here, what has been added?
Email, beeper, phone call.
What would that
email,
represent?
Digital age.
Generally, what does that represent? Technology. So technology has made this span of urgency longer, right? It gives us more sources to use. Still in this generation, they would write a letter, but then you have the more popular internet available. Now you can write an email. Then the beeper really represents the evolution of cell phones, right? Something mobile that's on someone to get in touch with them. Then of course the landline, right? And then the face-to-face. Generation Y, what's added in here?
Well,
Social media.
private public message, instant message, text.
Okay. So an evolution of technology, right? We see social media, right? We still see email. We see instant messaging, which is a little different. Texting, right? And then cell phones, right? Before someone reaches face-to-face. So when we look at the span of urgency, there's more technologies added to this spectrum, right? And just to give you kind of a general breakdown of people that are born within these eras, so it goes boomers, Generation X, Generation Y. And actually there's an error in this PowerPoint. This should actually say Generation Z. So if you're born in this generation, we can only imagine what this spectrum looks like for you guys.
That's
right?
a Generation X, so not Z.
Right, yeah, it's supposed to say Z. That's what I
Z.
said. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm
So,
Generation Z.
when we think about your spectrum, what's in there? There's Snapchat, there's Instagram, there's Twitter,
FaceTime.
right? There's a whole span of development of technology that's made this span even longer, right? And the main thing that's happening here is what? What's being removed?
Technology is getting more advanced.
And what's being removed?
The level of urgency
Face to
between
face.
communication.
Face to face, right? There's more technology being put in between you and the endpoint, which is to get in touch with somebody, right? So there's different methods being placed in between you before you get to face, right? Yes, Odin.
There's also people like me who are in some way a form of Luddite, where, say on Generation Y there, I don't have wall posts, I don't have private message. Emails are my least important concern. And then if move instant message, I just have phone call. So if I have an email, I can put it aside. If I get
Right.
a text or phone call, it's important. If someone's coming out of the way to talk to me, something's gone down.
So we, in terms of generations, will determine, again, this is just a general overview of everybody in the U.S., okay? This doesn't mean that it's specific to us, because if we look at this spectrum, and the reason we share this in this type of presentation to a tribe would be what? Obviously, this breakdown doesn't work if you're on the reservation, right? We barely started getting cell phones.
Yeah, and
So if we're building a website for a tribe, who is it really for, right? So knowing this type of information is kind of key in terms of communication. As an artist, how would this be useful?
Knowing which kind of people you're doing it for or addressing.
So this span of people still exists, right? Meaning they're still alive. So if we look at someone from the boomer generation, they would still prefer a brochure, something printed, something physical, right? So as an artist, you might want to think about having a postcard, a flyer that has information on it, because they'll still take it, right? Where if we look at a generation in, say, Y, they may just say, hey, what's your website? And you don't need a printed thing, and they just remember. Or what's your, or maybe the main question for Generation Y would be, or was, are you on Facebook, right? So as an artist, you have to know where you're going to spend your money, if you're going to spend any money on things that you might use to promote yourself, right? The other thing to do, this of course is related to foundations, is looking at who's around, who's your competitors as artists, who's already putting things out, right? So here on campus we have Nakona Burgess, right? Jeff Cam, Jim Rivera, myself, other artists, right? So in terms of IA, how do we look in this spectrum of artists, right? And these logos represent who are not necessarily their competitors, but what does the scope of the foundation world look like in terms of imagery, right? So in some ways we have to match the look of what foundations are doing, but at the same time make them different, right? So it's almost a contradictory kind of message. So this is the old logo. Maybe next time I'll show you what we actually created for the logo, but this is what we did in order to get everybody on the same page, right? So now we move into part of the presentation where we say, okay, here's your foundation logo. What are we going to do now? What are some ideas, right? As a presentation, what did you think about that in terms of the look?
I liked it, but I felt it ended a little abruptly.
That was, it's just an example, but we're
Yeah,
looking at design. We're looking at how things popped out, didn't pop out. Yeah.
It was kind of plain,
Plain?
like
Okay.
white backgrounds and stuff like that.
Okay.
It was simple. It got to the
Simple.
point.
Okay.
Simple and to the point.
So on your notepads, write my first tip. Keep it simple. Okay? Now, that's going to kind of evolve, all right? The reason I say that is just because it's simple doesn't mean you can't add things to it, okay? The reason you want to keep it simple is that PowerPoints were originally designed to be sort of a support mechanism for a presentation, right? So if I showed up here presenting PowerPoint and I typed everything out that I was going to say and showed each slide, which you've probably seen before, of words and words and words, a small image, right? And most of the time, the habit of a presentation like that is the person is looking at the wall like this, right? Normally. Have you guys been to presentations like that?
Yeah.
Where their back is against you and you're just like, well, I could have just read all that if you just sent it to me, So there's no sort of engagement. So you're the star, okay? The PowerPoint is just supplementary to what you're trying to say. Odin.
An example of this would be like TED Talks.
Right. So it's very important to know what you're going to talk about, right? So when we talk about presentations, it's better to have imagery, less text, right? Simple bullet points, and that way your message comes across and the presentation is just helping you. So the reason why my strategy in terms of creating these PowerPoints was using white, right, for that presentation was I didn't want to put the client in a state where I was already suggesting things. I never want to suggest things. As a design firm, we create multiple graphics for multiple clients. So if I end up creating a brand, right, for my organization, and it's a certain look, sometimes people tend to think, well, is that what mine is going to look like, right? So for me, as an artist, I like to start with a white sheet, right? So for me, that's the strategy behind a clean white color. It could be a different color, but I just like white, okay? So in terms of evolution, right, you saw the first one. Here's how we evolve, right, using animation.
That's true.
Okay. So this is probably, okay, this is what I'm used to for those of you who are in that Generation Z line. So going on the line, this presentation was shared at a national conference. I got invited to talk to national nonprofits about developing their websites and understanding their websites, and but this relates to you as an artist too, okay? Because all the information here is sort of best practices, and so the title of the presentation was going on the line, right? Do you guys have grandparents?
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't really get like what going online means, so
On the line.
going on the line is like, right? Okay. Hopefully you get it. So for this presentation, you might see differences now, right, in how this presentation is created. It's a little long, so I'm going to kind of go through it really quickly. It's more or less to see this presentation, okay? So in this presentation, I talk about navigation. So if you want to take notes, if you're planning to create a website, you might want to take notes. So for me, the way I critique websites is based on their navigation structure. And what I mean by that is how they organize their information, right? So when you look at a website, there's usually a bar or a menu, right? And in that menu might be what we consider a primary set of information, right? So for this, it would be about our work, resources, news, and donate. So because this presentation was structured for nonprofits, I try to give them what the best terminology is currently being used, right? So you as artists, again, in the previous presentations I shared, you can try to set trends, right? But if you're trying to model yourself just off of what the best practices are, it's to use what are common languages, right? So using about would obviously be about, so it's making this experience easier for someone to find your information. So the first set of information that you see on a menu would be your primary menu, and then anything that's within that would be your secondary menu, and then anything within the secondary would be the tertiary menu, right? So there's levels of navigation. The primary is also called a parent, right? So as you move into maybe ePortfolio, I don't know if they're still going to be using WordPress, but the primary menu item is known as a parent, right? And because we want to relate this to things that make sense to us, anything that belongs to a parent would be called a child, right? So a subpage. So if we take, for example, the About page, these three things could fall under the About page: the mission statement and the vision, the board of directors, and the staff. So to visually see this, right, this is what we might see, okay? You have a secondary menu that's on the top that's not really a part of this, but it's just there as an example of how things can be laid out differently. You have About, Our Work, Resources, News, and Donate. Oftentimes when I see sites, they use different words about who they are, right? So sometimes I'll see, it'll instead of saying About, it'll say who we are, and other things to explain the different parts of the website. But for me, it's using the language again to keep things simple, right? So to animate this example of what can happen for this type of structuring of a menu is to have your primary and your secondary, right? So for example, if the person clicked on staff, this is what will come up. Another thing that's important is if you're moving your website into a third level menu system, right? Meaning you have the parent and the subparent and then another menu within that, which could be within About. You have team members, right? So say I could click on this person and then I could get the full bio, right? Which takes us even further into the site. What's known as breadcrumbs is one of the best practices to use. Why would that be? Okay.
Because as the client or viewer continues to click on the breadcrumbs, they learn more and more about the website and end up learning how to navigate it in their own experience.
Right.
And in theory, they're going at their own pace versus seeing like a Wikipedia where you see a word that'll be highlighted in the middle of an article, which makes you have to stop reading that article and look at the new things and do that.
Right. So what did Hansel and Gretel do? And
the breadcrumbs so they knew where they were.
right. So that's the connection here, right? If I'm on this site and I've gone this deep into this website, I want my customer to be able to visually see where I've gone. So if I want to go back, I'm not stuck figuring out where I am on the site, right? So that's breadcrumbs. And this is a visual of how it's actually in use, right? A site that we designed. So it shows you actually how it can work. Again, combining things like news and events. Ways to give is also another way that nonprofits use to donate, right? So ways to give sounds friendlier than donate. Donate's more of an aggressive way to say give money. Okay. So moving into design. One of the things that has changed within the past couple of years of us creating websites, and it moves so quickly, is this new technology called responsive design. Okay, so when we think of responsive design and creating websites, even 2-3 years ago, was to create a singular site, meaning that the coding was all made to fit one type of device, which was usually a laptop or a desktop, right? With the creation of smartphones and tablets, this whole thing has caused us to change how we create sites. Okay, so in order to understand this better, I'll show you kind of a visual, because just by hearing responsive design doesn't really make sense, right? So with responsive design, you take a traditional website, right, and this is the experience you might have with the website. On a tablet, you might have to be scrolling, and this still exists with some people's websites, right? You're moving and scrolling up and down because it hasn't been optimized. The flash video there, if you're on a tablet with an Apple, it's not going to work, right? So responsive design is a method in which the content is reorganized based on the device that's being used, right? And it's all organized and reformatted to fit the device so that it's, in the end, the user experiences best experience that you want to give them. Right? So did you guys all see the animation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was that cool?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is there can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there a program that does that reorganizes it for each, for the tablet, for the phone, or is that something that has to be done by an individual and modifying each?
Well, there's different sites right now, right? So at this conference, I mentioned that WordPress is one of the most popular content management systems that's driven by the people. So even when I started in 2000, the way that websites were designed was what we consider all hard-coded, meaning it was all HTML, right? Just code and code and code and code and code. And it really took someone who understood how to edit that language to be able to make changes. So you had a lot of tech companies that were created during that time, and you would have to pay into their service of maintaining the website, making changes, right? But with the evolution of WordPress, it allowed someone like ourselves who had little knowledge, who can actually edit an email to change their website, right? So CMS is the term, right? Content Management System. That's what WordPress is. There are themes that you can buy and purchase that are pre-designed to be responsive design, okay? And it's basically just a coding that's been added to traditional HTML that will say if, right, in the coding, if the device has, and we know how much a pixel of a traditional laptop or desktop will be. So if a device sends us information that is beyond, say, 1200 pixels by whatever, then it knows, okay, this is a desktop or a laptop. If it's below, say, and now you have even Retina display from Apple, which makes pixels even smaller and more compact, it can recognize that from an iPhone to, so it's all based on the size of the screen. So that's really what the coding has changed, right? So there are themes that you can pre-buy to kind of have this effect happen. But that happens so quick. We were updating, even in the past year or two sites maybe a year, because they wanted them to be responsive to devices. Okay, so this is, and I'll share a little bit more of why this reason is happening. So Call to action, again, since this was for nonprofits, oftentimes they have call to action buttons, and what a call to action is on your site, if you look at this, again, another housing website that we designed, they often host conferences and meetings, and so their call to action would be to register, right? So if you look at a site and you see, sign up for my email, or register for this, that's considered a call to action. Right, so as an artist, this could be your sign up for my newsletter, get information from me, but you got to make it in a prominent location so that it's constantly there on the homepage. If this is something you want to practice in terms of collecting information. So the big deal with moving to responsive design is based on search engine optimization, or SEO, which is the common term. And what this basically is how you gather information from the internet, right? Most popular sites are Google, Bing, and Yahoo. Anyone use anything different?
AOL.
AOL? It's mostly Google, right?
I use Explorer.
So if we were to use Google, right, and for this conference we're going to use the keywords native nonprofits, right? So we type in the search bar native nonprofits. With search engine optimization, and how it works is Google basically produces an algorithm, right? It looks at what you've typed in, and the space is what determines what these keywords are going to be. So native, non, and profits are 3 separate words. If you put those in quotes, then it's just going to search with those words all combined. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So once it does that, it returns a list of information, right? So we look at this list and we see index of Native American nonprofits, resources on the internet, nonprofits, Native Americans in philanthropy, strengthening tribal and community institutions, First Nations, okay? And what's funny is that I was actually presenting on behalf of First Nations, so if you look at the results, they're in the top 3. Commonly, 90% of the time, people will click on the first 3 to 5 results, okay? Now this is for something that you're maybe shopping for, so it's more of an e-commerce number, 90%. But if you're doing research, right, on native nonprofits, you would probably keep scrolling down, right, just to see what was in the return. But if we look at what is in blue, you'll see that nonprofits is there, Native American. So you'll see different keywords that appear. So search engine optimization is based on keywords, right? So how does this make sense to you as an artist? It's the keywords that you assign to your site that they're frequently using, right? So say you're a painter, right? And it's oil, canvas, pastels, I don't know. That those are your frequent words that are being used on your site. That's how you're going to figure out, how Google's going to figure out what is basically the content of your site, right? Yeah.
Is there a way to search Google for what is, say if somebody was searching for a Native American artist, is there a way to find out what what are the
Like the trends?
most popular words that
Yeah.
you search for?
I can share how you get that information after the presentation, but Google does provide sort of a breakdown of the top things that are being searched. So whenever you hear like the news saying these things are trending right now, where do they get that information? Usually from search engines, okay? Because most people are typing in certain things looking for that information. So whatever is being searched becomes a part of how that trending happens. So this is the main point that I'm trying to make about optimization and also responsive design. So when you look at, for example, these phones, right? In Google, there's a new algorithm coming out, and this was like last year, and it's changing even to this year. Sites that were scanned, right, through Google can determine if a site has responsive design, meaning that it's going to adjust its layout to fit the device, right? If it does adjust itself to fit the device, then Google will push up the ranking even higher, right? Just on that optimization. So if you ever, with your phone, search something in Google, sometimes it'll say mobile friendly and sometimes it won't, right? And usually italicizes it. And that's where the new push for sites and companies are switching to that because they want a better ranking. And that doesn't mean that just by doing that it's going to make you go to number 1. It all has to do with keywords, right? So how do you know this, right? How do you know that the keywords that are being searched or people visiting your site, how are they finding you? It's using analytics, okay? So Google Analytics, again, it's a free source, is something that can be used to determine what keywords are being used and how people are finding them. So of course it's free and it's easy to integrate with any website, and basically it has the best analytics that I've seen. So this is kind of a glimpse on a client's site. Okay, so many of you maybe have heard of College Horizons or Graduate Horizons. No, should look it up. Okay, so we host their site, and this is just a span of August to September. Okay, looking at information. So for me, this is kind of like you guys just came out of working with Excel, and it's sometimes not fun, right? But for me, this is like the fun part of like actually seeing what's happening on your site. So just to kind of give you a brief overview of what's happening, the pie chart on the right shows you a green and blue graph, right? The green is returning visitors, the blue is new, okay? And how this is determined is if we were in this room and we got on for the first time on each one of these computers onto their website, it's going to track the IP address of each one of these computers, okay? That'll put that in the new visitor number, right? Say class ended and we came back to class and you're like, I want to learn more about that organization. You typed it in again from the same computer. That now is going to shift that IP address to information to the returning visitor section, right? Do you see how that works?
Yeah.
So it tracks the typing in or the information being sent back and forth from a computer to determine whether you're a new or a returning, okay? So that's how that information is set up. If we were building a site to sell products, right? So if you're starting your own business, right? And we look at average session duration, see how it says 3 minutes and 9 seconds? That's like unrealistic in a like e-commerce kind of like site selling things. Why would that be? Do any of you shop online?
Not really.
Have bought at least one thing, Amazon. Yeah, we all bought something online, right? Most of the time, when you're searching for the product, you're probably clicking through many sites till you find the best deal, right? So sometimes you'll look at a product and it's like, it's a little expensive, and you click away and you go off. So that calculation is determined by how many times or how long you spend on that site, right? So say you visit their site and you're looking for scholarships and they have a resource section, and it takes you 2 minutes to finally figure out what you're wanting. On average, people are spending 3 minutes on this site, which is a good thing. You want people to stay on your site, right? Bounce rate is another thing that's kind of interesting. On average, people are looking at about 3 pages per visit, right? So probably the home page and then maybe a site that has resources with applications on it or scholarships. If you look at the language too, this is kind of cool. English US, English, French, Spanish, right? Italian. Again, just kind of cool information. You can also get a world view, right? Who's actually viewing your information from where. The dark blues are going to be the most viewed areas or countries. And we forget to recognize this, right? When sites are built, especially like with Native organizations, they tend to think just US, right? But oftentimes they forget that the internet is global, right? So anybody can find your information. One of the things that's pretty funny with finding this information, I'll show you in the keywords, but when we can zoom into the United States, we can see what part of the country we're targeting, right? So in terms of starting your business, say you're a national organization, we're targeting New Mexico. Are we doing our job? Yeah, we are, because it's in dark blue, right? So our second largest states would be California, Arizona, and look at Hawaii, okay? So we're seeing a big glimpse of visits from Hawaii. Maybe we want to recruit there, right, if people are being interested in this. This could also show you sales if you were selling things, right? And then as the color fades out, that's how you're determining who's viewing your site. And the reason why this is missing is not because that doesn't exist anymore, it's just nobody's visited, okay? So that's kind of useful information. So by state, we can see how many visits are coming in, and this is really interesting here. It's only like a 1% off, right? Hawaii and New Mexico, and I know why that happened, and I'll share why. Okay. So if we wanted to look just at New Mexico, you could, right? We can see what cities in New Mexico are getting the most frequent visits, right? Albuquerque, Santa Fe. Anybody recognize any other sites? Gallup, Farmington, right? You can kind of visually see where these areas might be. Mescalero might be down there. But of course, you can get the list of everything here. So Shiprock's in there, Espanola, Farmington, right? For us, this is like kind of useful information, right? If this were information for our school's website, we could see that obviously these areas are of interest to us, but we would be surprised at Deming and Rio Rancho, right? So maybe we recruit there. So all this information can be translated into how you use it within your business. So this is the cool part, right? We can see of our visitors how many devices were being used. So of our 17,000 visitors, 12,000 viewed it from a desktop. This could be a desktop or a laptop, okay? The next, and second is mobile, right? And third is a tablet, right? Useful information. Going further, we can see what device they used, right? Does this scare anybody?
Yeah, like tracking.
Right.
Just
Feel like an invasion of privacy.
A little bit, right?
I mean,
So
this
we
is-
can see of these
this is what
viewers,
marketing teams do.
a majority
Yeah.
were using iPhones, right? So for someone who sold cellular devices, what would we want to push?
iPhones.
iPhones, right?
What is not set?
That means it probably couldn't be recognized, right? The information that was sent back and forth.
Bash's phone.
Could be a burner phone. I don't know. But it's interesting to see what phones are being used to view the site, right? Site traffic, okay, going into optimization in terms of search engine stuff. There's a couple of ways to get this information, right? Organic search. What that means is someone like yourselves went to a computer and typed in, I'm going to look for native scholarships today. So you put in native scholarships or native colleges or whatever the keywords might be. You organically typed them in. That's what organic search means, right? Anytime someone actually types in keywords into Google or Bing or Yahoo, that's organic. The next thing is direct, right? Say we went on a conference, right? And I handed out my business card to you on a Friday, right? And then on Monday I went and did my analytics search and I saw that there was a spike right here. Why is that? Well, we got to think, well, what did you do that week? I passed out maybe 500 business cards. That's how you know people are actually looking at your site, okay? So you can measure marketing within analytics, even though this is meant for websites, but usually that's the first place people are going to go, right? As an artist, if you're at Indian Market and you passed out like business cards with your web address on it, and you looked at your analytics, you should see a spike, right? If you don't, then you should rethink your art. I don't know. Third is referral, okay? Referral is if me and Alex were booth partners, right? And we're like, hey, you do jewelry and I do sculpture. We should have a link for whatever reason, right? I could put your necklaces, you can photograph them on my sculptures and whatever. That referral is him putting a link on my site for his site and then me putting one on his, right? So anytime there's that linking between two sites and anyone clicks on it, that's a referral, right? So it's like a third party direction to your site. And of course the fourth is social. Okay, so this is social media, 40, so we can even dive into social and see where that's coming from. So if we look at the sources, this is the traffic. Google Organic, so this information tells me people are using Google the most to find this information, right? The second is direct, right? So people are actually typing in collegehorizons.org. Right, so they're not even looking through Google to find it, they're just typing it in the web address area. The next thing is they have a sister organization called Graduate Horizons. So there's the link, right? So that's telling me that most people are visiting from Graduate Horizons and then going back. So 72 people of that 1,700 clicked on Graduate Horizons first and then went to College Horizons. Then fourth and fifth is being in Yahoo, right? You'll see 7th is Facebook, so it could have been a post they did, and it said visit our website. That's how we know that Facebook referred us. There's another AIGCS, right, and mobile Facebook, so it actually is pretty detailed in how people are coming to your site. So if we see Facebook in 7th and we want more social sites or social links and we want to build our social network, maybe we do more posts on Facebook, right? We don't see Twitter on here, we don't see Instagram, so maybe we could consider those technologies. This is pretty funny. So number 1 is not provided, so through time we could filter out what the keywords might be, but if you look at 2nd, they're actually Googling College Horizons, right? So they may not know, is it a .com or is it a .org? So they just type in College Horizons and it comes up. The 3rd one, Indian College, right? 4th, again, College Horizon, but it doesn't have the S. The 5th is they're actually typing in the whole web address. 6th, in their search, 2 people put Native American education rates, and there might have been something, whether it was a blog that was on their site that had these keywords, and that's how they found it. But check this one out, 8. All colleges of India.
That's
Right.
crazy.
Why would that be?
Indian.
Right.
India.
We forget that India is Indians too, right? Or they're the original Indians, right? So it's just, it's comical to me when I see keywords like that coming up, right? Like budget for college, Gishna, like it's Indian, like Eastern Indian. It's kind of funny. But so tribes forget that that's a part of what comes up in their analytics, and they always wonder, why are we getting all these like hits from India? I'm like, well, because you're using Indian.
What's your first mistake?
Okay, so referrals, again, just to break it down, it shows you Graduate Horizons and then the list. Here's colby.edu, so it was probably a relationship with that college. Eventtracking.com, it might have been a registration site. National Indian Education Association, so they might have had a link or promoted them. NAU.edu, Northern Arizona University. So there's all these sort of links between how you can see if your work is actually working and where you could get referrals from. So again, looking at social sources, Facebook is number 1 with 38 visits, LinkedIn 1, Twitter 1. So if they wanted to have a goal and produce more Twitter followers, they can watch this number grow, right? They can push more tweets and see how they can do that. So I know later on in this semester, we're going to start talking about social media, right? So how does that work, right? So the best practices that we've seen is integrating these 4 major social media platforms, okay? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, right? So if we look at Facebook and how this can be integrated, we always looking towards the like share feature, right? Have you visited sites and you've seen you can like this page or like this article or share this article, right? You'll see these kind of buttons, right? And you'll have the number of people that liked it. So the way this basically works is as soon as person, say, visits your site and you have this, right? As soon as they hit like, the number of people goes up. Okay.
I know there's certain video games, both browser and like console games, that have this function on them.
Mhm.
And if I remember correctly, it's because it's part of like basically like a partnership thing, where if they get X amount of people to like, share, or subscribe to their Facebook,
Right.
they get a partnership with Facebook and the company that owns it.
Right. Yeah, a lot of games are starting to integrate socially into the stuff that they develop. I know, like some games, you can gain credits, right? If it's a paid for type of game, where if you like something or watch a video, you get 2 more credits to continue playing, right? So that's all using this sort of technology, obviously. So the best way that I always advise clients to integrate social media is not to have social media happening on your site in terms of interaction, right? Meaning that if you're going to integrate Facebook, do it by showing the comments that people have left you, right? Or looking at your feed, right? Your timeline. The reason why you don't want to have any of this kind of interaction is that social networks are created to happen within those platforms, right? Twitter was meant to happen on Twitter, not to be on iai.edu and everyone's going to IAI to do their Twitter posts, right? So it's just to show a brief glimpse of what's happening on your social media sites, but it's really important to have that integration because again, if you're trying to increase your social following in Twitter, you want to have them go somewhere, right? Because oftentimes, if you're not there to ask, or they're not there to ask you, hey, are you on Facebook? Are you on Twitter? How do they know that you're on there? You have to have that integrated within your site, right? Same thing with Instagram, right? So having these types of integrations where they can see what's happening with your site is kind of, and to know that you're social, because that's where most of the live stuff happens. So again, as an artist, if you had, and you were at Indian Market and people knew of your site and they followed you, you could then start to push more of the instant notification, right, to somebody and saying, okay, it's 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock at Indian Market, I'm having a 50% off sale, come visit me now, right? And who wouldn't want to get that? I would. How was that presentation?
That's good. Better.
Better. You saw the evolution, right?
Yes.
Okay. What was different about this one?
It's a lot more in depth.
Okay. Visually, design-wise, what was different? Did it feel better? Did it seem...
It was warmer, a lot more colors.
Okay.
It was more, I couldn't see a lot of it, I'll just be honest with you.
Okay.
During that presentation, I couldn't see the majority of it back here.
Okay.
So, but I could see that there were colors on there.
Great.
And there was a
It
lot
might be
more
because you're under a light.
current information. There was
Is that better?
Generation Z stuff.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Alexis?
There were smooth transitions and you're not exiting out to the PowerPoint screen, so it's not as distracting. It feels really smooth and the animations keep your visual interest while still tying into what you're talking about.
Anyone else?
Well, I thought the information was really current too.
Did I look at my presentation at all? Sometimes, just to kind of
Yeah.
point at it, right? But I wasn't really doing that, right? Some of the key things too, when I first started building PowerPoints, and also probably you guys did it in high school, right? Building presentations. One of the other things was knowing that you shouldn't use a lot of the sound effects that are in there, right? I mean, that's cute and stuff, but I think in a professional presentation, you don't want whoosh, ting, ting. You know what I mean? You don't want those distractions because then people are going to focus on that rather than focusing on your content, right? So when we look at some of my animations, I try to make things look as realistic, if you will, as they might be when they're in practice, right? So for example, we know what Google looks like, right? And one of my transitions or ways to get people to feel interested is to actually have it look like it's being typed, right? So it's like we're on the internet, but we're not. But it looks like we are because I recognize that. Same thing with the results, right? It shows us a screenshot, right? One of the things too that I'll mention about this, that when we talked about privacy and how everything is sort of changing, I was talking to Steve about this after the last class, was how the new algorithm is changing, right? For how people or customers or companies are getting you to buy things, right? If we take a look at this right-hand side, see how it says ads at the top? Have you ever noticed if you were doing the search, say, for your kid or whatever, and you were searching for a costume? I just used a kid because I did this a couple weeks ago, and I typed in Star Wars Return of the Clones costume, right? And didn't like what I found, so I turned off the internet, came back a day or two later, and then I started to notice in the ads, $9.99 at Walmart, clones costume, right? So what's happening here, and if you've noticed on your phone too, if you have an iPhone, even a newer smartphone, have you ever gone into a store and then you get a coupon in your email? Right? So a lot of this information is constantly being sent back and forth, right? The new algorithm is designed so that when I walk into Michael's, and this happened before, I get like an email and I'm like, oh, what's that? And then it says, get 20% off at Michael's. I'm like, how did you know I was at Michael's, right? Close it, and then I walk over to Best Buy, same thing, 15% off. I'm like, how do, So a lot of this information is because of our devices, right? Little bits of information, if you're allowing to share your location, right, will create this experience for you because it's a consumer-based experience, right? So just be aware, okay? That's just sort of like the thing to consider. The tips now. This one is created in Keynote, if you look at the top, right? I've been to conferences where they say we're only going to have Mac computers at our venue. So if I bring a PowerPoint, and what if they don't have the latest PowerPoint, right? I have to have the flexibility to have a presentation in a platform that can be in something that's available to me. The other thing to keep in mind is like fonts, right? If I use custom fonts that I found on the website, on a certain website, and I chose to use it, and I put my PowerPoint presentation on that flash drive, and I went off to fly to Denver, and I plugged it in, and I was ready to go, and the font is like cannot be found because it's not available. What happens then, right? So using the system fonts in the very beginning is kind of crucial, right? And you can do a lot of cool things, right? If you look at the designs here, it's one family, meaning that this font, you guys remember?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm using bold and regular, or bold and thin, right? So this font has multiple styles, meaning that thickness changes. And I can visually make things look interesting by simply changing the weight of that font, right? It doesn't have to be like 20 different fonts that I'm using, right? I'm using one font throughout this whole thing. So using your fonts and being aware that if it's a system font, meaning is the font I'm using available on every platform like Keynote or PowerPoint, right? So just being aware that fonts can be tricky, okay? What's the one thing you notice about my graphics?
Bold and simple and easy to see. Down there, the shape of
Are
the
they pixelated?
No.
They're clean and they're crisp, right? Even if we look at that screenshot, right? If we look at this animation of the movie, notice that the graphics, let's just skip to the movie. Oops. You get it, right? All the graphics match the style in which I've created this PowerPoint presentation in, right? So using quality graphics or high quality graphics. Now that's something that Steve and I will be talking a lot about, is using, and he'll explain a little better about the imagery and how all of this is compressed, but like all the graphics that you're seeing here are vector graphics, right? So Odin and Alex should know what this means. They're scalable art creations, right? So I won't lose any resolution or I won't get any pixelation because of the quality of the graphics that I've created using Illustrator. Okay. So using quality graphics. Creating a theme, right? I know that I mentioned the difference between this theme and the one before. It's sort of an evolution and it's cleaner, right? It's a little bit bolder, but it's also not a theme that I used that's in the templates, right? I used white because, as I mentioned before, I don't want to give my clients an idea of what their stuff might look like, right? So I kind of want to have a non-biased look, for me at least. If you're an artist, you can create your own look, right? So using that. Using color, right? Mine was probably a little more cool, right? I have greens and blues. I do have orange, but the orange isn't enough to make it warm up. Odin?
Just out of curiosity, normally when you run, say, an advertisement agent and a company calls you for a contract, would it be safe to assume that they've probably seen your portfolio, or at least seen your designs, you would know ahead of time what it is they're getting into?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, this is, of course, like presentations where I'm in, like I'm here, I'm actually showing you. I could incorporate my work, So again, when we're like addressing Odin's question, if we were going to present our portfolio, I wouldn't really want to build it where I'm focused on the transitions, right? I would want to focus it on subtlety, right? Whether it's a fading out and a fading in, but not like a crazy animation happening.
What I actually meant is more like, if the company is hiring you out, they've probably seen your work. Not with this presentation, but like,
Right.
we're hiring you to make a logo or design for us. We already know what your stuff looks like. Therefore, it wouldn't matter if you're coming up with an unbiased design. We already know what your style is.
Right. I get what you're saying now. So for example, on my own website, I would share the work I've done, right? So I would have a section of my portfolio. Doesn't mean that everything that I'm going to create looks like that. It depends on the project, of course. But for me, in terms of doing my own presentations, I've removed my logo. If you let me see if I can pop it back up. So again, some of these things when I talked about keeping it simple. Where's PowerPoint? Notice how I have my little logo on the bottom right corner. For me, that became too distracting, right? And it's something I learned, right? It's on the bottom of every page. Of course, talking about branding, it's sort of a symbol of a brand, right? It's there on every part of it. But I didn't find it necessary in a presentation where I'm giving the best practices, right? I could have had it there, but I thought design-wise, again, looking back at keeping it simple, am I putting things there just to put things there because there's white space, right? So knowing that white space can be effective, it doesn't have to be cluttered. It can just be this simple, right? Because again, if you mention you're the star, this is secondary. It's for those people that are visual learners that need to see things to get what you're saying, right? And this whole section here is based on that, right? Where I'm actually putting this into practice, right? You're seeing how this works because I start with just seeing this. This doesn't make any sense visually. Like we don't get, what do you mean by menu? What do you mean by secondary menu, right? So until you see this and how it functions visually, that's supporting my presentation. It's not there to kind of be distracting, I guess. Okay, so limited transitions and builds, right? So my transitions are very simple. Limiting your points in your text, right? If you look at all of these slides right here, images, right? Hardly any text. And even when we get into analytics, these are screenshots and graphics, right, of the chart. But I try to keep them really simple. Charts are there for obvious reasons to show you what it looks like, but if I could, I would probably remove some of the data just and rebuild it myself. But and then knowing that the platform you're using, right? So the presentation that I often get called to create templates for companies, and I have to ask, well, what are you using? Are you using a projector or are you using a flat screen TV, right? So if they're using an HD TV, there's ways to set your canvas, right? So the size of this right here to the size that's going to fit what you're projecting onto, right? So I have this on a screen that can fit like a flat screen. So if I was presenting in the conference room in CLE on the first floor, it's an HD flat screen, right? It's not projection. If I put this on there, you'll see the black lines on the side, right? And I don't really like that. I'd rather take advantage of the full screen so I can adjust the screen, right, to the width. So I have multiple versions of the same PowerPoint. So for me, my brand is to always come off clean and crisp, right? I don't want to see the black lines on the side of the TV if I can take advantage of the full screen, right? And I think that's it. I gave you most of my tips. I can answer any questions now. Or Steve, do you have anything that I might have forgotten?
You can go to
Okay.
give them a break,
Yeah.
and then I'll bother you.
Okay.
All right, so
Thank you.
come back at 25 after 7 today,
Thank
and
you.
that's 25 after 7 this evening.